Hello and welcome everybody to another Healthy Living live stream. My name is Alexander Raskovich, and today's topic is what's the real cause of obesity? What's weight loss failures explained by Andrew Kaufman MD. This time he'll give an extensive, in-depth presentation about obesity. Now, let me bring him on. Andrew Kaufman MD, are you there?
Hi, here I am, Alexander.
Hi there.
How you doing?
Doing
So
great.
listen, today, let me give a spoiler alert here. I'm going to be talking about toxic chemicals stored in our body fat. So I wanted to ask you, Alexander, have you ever been overweight?
I have never been overweight, fortunately.
Gotcha. So you're one of those thin guys that we're all jealous of who can eat probably whatever you want, right? And not put on a pound. So does that mean that you don't have any chemicals stored in your body fat? Do you think it means that possibly?
I don't think so, but what is it?
Well, actually, we also have body fat that's surrounding our organs, like our liver, for example. It's called visceral fat or organ fat. And that fat, which can build up even in thin people, can store the same toxic chemicals, and you'll never know it. So I want to say that this talk is relevant really to everyone, not just people who are struggling with being overweight or obese.
Right, sounds like I should pay close attention then. I'm
All
ready.
right, excellent, Alexander. So let me get started. So, why is it so hard to lose weight? Let's start there. Well, the most people think that being overweight or obese is due to problems with your diet and a lack of exercise. But if we look at the patterns of the overall population, during the last 50 years, when we saw these rising rates of obesity, although you might think people eat more because of convenience and processed food being so readily available and palatable, actually, data shows that the total number of calories, and we might talk about the validity of calories, but let's just say the amount of food people eat has actually gone down in the same time that obesity has gone up. And that may be surprising, but this is what the data shows. Now, with respect to exercise, we have similar studies because, it was originally thought that when we stopped doing a lot of manual labor and industrialized our economy and moved into the cities, that people were more sedentary in their lifestyle. And that may be true for many people. But the knowledge of this has led to increased participation in exercise and fitness. And thus, the activity has actually gone up over the same time course that obesity continues to be on the rise. Many of you know that when you've tried diets that you have had perhaps some temporary success, but you can get into this yo-yo pattern. The weight always comes back on. You may experience feeling sick while you're losing weight. And a lot of this is because your physiology, right, the way your body works has actually been changed by these chemicals that I'm going to talk about, and specifically the weight control mechanisms that your body has, right? We're supposed to put on weight to build up a store of, food and energy in our bodies to withstand famine, for example. And so we can put on fat for that purpose, and then our bodies can metabolize that fat in other times. But these mechanisms have been corrupted and changed, as I'm about to explain. Also, when it comes to exercise for weight loss, there have been many studies, and overall, it shows that there isn't not any appreciable weight loss from exercise. And there are, a couple of reasons for this. One is that the exercise stimulates the appetite, so you tend to eat proportionally more because of the excess energy demands. So, what's really going on, causing and contributing to obesity in ways that are can explain the resistance to these other strategies? So I want to bring up two papers. This first one, adipose tissue as a site of toxin accumulation. Hopefully I can get my camera to focus on it. And you can see this paper. We'll try to put the links below. This paper is a very long and thorough paper, but very high quality, as well as this other paper. If I can get this one to focus. Next time we'll have to make graphics of these so we don't have this problem, but this is Chemical Toxins, a Hypothesis to Explain the Global Obesity Epidemic. So let me display a graphic, and this is a table from the second article. And what this shows here is a graph over the last 100 years approximately of the number of synthetic industrial chemicals that have been manufactured, and that is in the line on the top with the dark circles. And then below it, the line with the triangles is obesity rates in the population. And you can see that there is a pretty substantial correlation here with a delay in the effect. And this is not, of course, conclusive. This is epidemiologic data. However, this definitely supports the possibility that these industrial chemicals are responsible, at least in part, for the rise in obesity. All right, thanks, Alexander, for that. So let's talk about what these chemicals are and how we get exposed to them. So I'm talking about chemicals that have a property that they're known as being lipophilic, meaning they love fat or lipids. So this is also could be referred to as non-polar, right? That these types of molecules do not dissolve in water. Now, our body, as you know, is by weight about 70% or 2/3 water. And by the molecule count, it's actually 99+% of every molecule in our body are water. So when things don't dissolve in water, our body can have a difficult time dealing with them, including eliminating them effectively. And of course, this could be further complicated when our routes of elimination may be compromised, such as when we might have liver congestion or we are constipated or other health conditions. So what are the type of classes of molecules that we're talking about here that are lipophilic, and where do they come from and how do they get in our bodies? Well, first, let me say that most of this data comes from actually taking the adipose tissue or the fatty tissue, whether it be from the visceral fat, as I discussed, from the organs, or mostly it's from the subcutaneous fat, which is what we can see with, the abdominal rolls under our skin, for example. So they've actually found all these chemicals in our skin. And in fact, there's a challenge to doing this scientific research with having a control group because they can't find any organisms that have zero of these chemicals in their body. So the research is done based on the levels and the amounts that they find rather than a pure control group. So these include one, microplastics, which is becoming a larger and larger problem, phthalates, which can come from plasticizing chemicals, organochlorine pesticides, and really many other pesticide residues, organophosphates, bisphenols like BPA or bisphenol A, but there are other bisphenols that haven't been studied that likely also have these properties. PCBs and PBBs, which is polychlorinated and polybrominated biphenyls, DDT and DDE and related pesticides, forever chemicals like PFOAs, dioxin, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, and heavy metals like cadmium and lead, seed oils, carbamates, solvents, and pharmaceuticals. So quite a broad list of different classes and sources of chemicals. So how do these get in our body? Well, there's lots of data showing a variety of routes. In fact, very significantly, this begins before we're even born in utero. And these chemicals that are stored in the mother's body go across the placenta into the developing baby. And this process continues after birth through the breast milk. And these products can even concentrate in the breast milk because of the fatty content. Now, in our life, other sources that we get certainly is from food, and this is in the form of pesticide and herbicide residues in food, especially food that is not grown organically or naturally. It can be concentrated in animal fat, especially animals raised eating a GMO or other feed that contains these chemicals. So it's important to eat meat that's raised in the pasture where the pastures are not treated with these chemicals. And preservatives, coloring, and other food additives also may be in this class of chemicals. Clothing. Much of the modern clothing and advanced fiber technology is made with plastic fibers that are made into textiles, and these can leach plasticizing chemicals and things that are like xenoestrogens, which I'll mention momentarily. Also, personal hygiene and beauty products, things that go on your skin, can be absorbed into your body. And of course, air pollution, both indoor and outdoor air pollution. And there are many, many different sources of these chemicals in both of those environments. So we see that no one is really spared from exposure, but we can, through changing our behavior and lifestyle, mitigate and reduce this exposure substantially. And then, of course, do things to actually help our bodies get rid of the chemicals that are already accumulated and stored there. So let's now talk about the effects of these chemicals on the body once they've been exposed. So as I mentioned, it's important to note that if you have impaired elimination and natural body detoxification, like from a congested liver, that your body is more likely to store these chemicals. So those are things that you need to recognize and address. So we have first the direct toxicity of these chemicals, that if we, injected them into the blood, depending on the dose, what would it cause? And in some cases, even with the amount of exposure that we get with our current lifestyle, we could even have a fatal response to some of these substances. So it's very good that your body does this mechanism because if all these things just stayed floating around our blood and had to settle into a vital organ, we could end up very sick or dead from this exposure. So what does our body do? It accumulates these substances in fat because fat dissolves fat. So when we have our fat cells, right, the adipocytes, they actually store the extra fats in our body as a store of energy for the future, right? And it's in the form of triglycerides and other fats. And these are in throughout the cytoplasm of the fat cells, as well as in the membranes. And what we see is that the body accumulates these things in that fatty tissue in both of those compartments. So certainly there's more research looking at the lipid membrane components, although separately we don't know for sure that those are actual membranes, but certainly these lipids are in the cells. And mixed in with these lipids, we've seen a variety of these chemicals, including, things like seed oils. But they also diffuse into the cytoplasm. And we have this kind of further compounded problem that once we accumulate more fatty tissue, we have more of a capacity to store these chemicals. So the body will be more likely to store them the more fat we have. And this can really accelerate some of the problems that you have with increasing obesity. So there are some benefits, as I alluded to, from this process because it essentially sequesters these dangerous and poisonous chemicals in your body fat rather than having them float around the body and cause direct toxicity to your organs. So it's kind of like a safe toxic waste dump, right? But of course, it will have a capacity, and once that's exceeded, and then of course things can happen like leaking. So, because of that, we end up experiencing low dose toxicity or more of a chronic toxicity from lower levels of these chemicals leaching out in the fat as we go through changes over time that we might have a period where we have increased activity or decreased eating, and we might lose a little bit weight, and that releases these chemicals into our body. And they can, in lower levels, so it can begin to cause some chronic toxicity. And there are a number of ways this can affect the body. So one is the metabolism is altered. And this happens in a variety of different ways with different chemicals. But one common example is there is decreased um, uptake of glucose. When we absorb glucose through our gut, it goes into the blood, and then insulin provides the signal for our cells, especially our fat cells, to take up glucose. But this seems to be impaired, and this can contribute and lead to insulin resistance and even diabetes. Also, the weight control mechanisms of how we put on and take off weight to meet environmental needs can be altered by these chemicals and disrupted, so that when we try typical ways to lose weight, it may not be very successful. We'll have paradoxical results because we don't realize that our weight control mechanisms are not working properly. Now, we also have a lot of endocrine dysfunction that can occur, and this can happen in different endocrine systems. So in the sex hormones, the adrenal hormones, the thyroid hormones, for example. Xenoestrogens, which I mentioned earlier, is one of the sources or causes of disruption here. And there are many different types of those we're exposed to in the environment and in food. And then we have chronic disease developing or being worsened as a result of these chemicals. And this has been studied as well. And some examples would be, of course, diabetes, which I already mentioned, as well as cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes, and even cancer. So this is a real problem. And this is why obesity is associated with so many poor health outcomes. Now, when we have lipolysis or breaking down of this fatty tissue, for example, if we undergo a weight loss program, then what happens is that our fat cells release these chemicals into the circulation. And if we're not prepared for that, we're going to essentially have a cleansing reaction. We'll experience the toxicity of these substances as they're trying to get out of our body. So we need to make sure we support this. And this is exactly what happens when people go on a ketogenic diet and experience what they call the keto flu, which seems to defy explanation in the mainstream, but it's very simple. Because of the change in diet where they stop eating carbohydrates, the body changes over to fat metabolism and uses the fat as a fuel, which it breaks down, into ketone bodies. And this involves basically the fat cells breaking down and releasing those fats so they could be used for the body's metabolic functions. And when that happens, also these chemicals are released and they cause the toxicity to the body. So it can be experienced commonly as general malaise, nausea, vomiting, and decreased appetite, diarrhea, and perhaps even a fever, coating of the tongue, and other issues that are relatively mild in most cases. But this is the explanation of what's really going on to cause that. And if we support the body's elimination pathways, right, which, for example, through the bowels to the toilet, or through the skin, through sweating, like that you could do with saunas, for example, will help the body get rid of those things, and they're less likely to cause the discomfort that we might experience with that type of a cleansing reaction. Okay, now we're at the fun part where I talk about, well, how do we effectively remedy the situation, right? Because what I think is really happening is that not only is our body taking advantage of the opportunity to store these chemicals in the fat, but I think our body's actually building up our body fat in order to make room to store these chemicals. So what we need to do in order to remedy it is, one, decrease and eliminate as much as possible our exposure to these substances. And then two, start to encourage our body or support our body to actually dump these things completely out, right? And I mentioned that doing a ketogenic type of diet, right, which could be a carnivore diet, or it could be an omnivore diet that is essentially almost or completely carbohydrate free, can be a way to reverse this, because the cells will break down. But you need to prepare to help your body completely dump those things once the fat breaks down and they're released into the blood. So since these chemicals are all lipophilic, as I talked about earlier, the body has a hard time dealing with them since the body's water-based. So here's where the real magic comes in, that you can use what I call healing solvents, which can dissolve nonpolar lipophilic substances because they are oils, and they can help expedite removing these things from your body. And many of the people who have done this have had tremendous results. And I'm talking about turpentine here, which is the best solvent for very nonpolar substances, but also castor oil, DMSO, and even essential oils are all capable of doing this function. So that being said, I'd like to, as I always do, give you 3 simple action steps that you can begin today to begin to experience real weight loss that will stick around and leave you much, much healthier, even reducing your risk of all these chronic diseases. So number 1, I'm going to talk about some simple dietary changes you can make to reduce your exposure. So that includes eliminating seed oils from your diet, and you have to be very cautious about processed foods and restaurant meals because they use these seed oils ubiquitously. Uh, Eliminate processed foods from your diet. Eliminate non-organic fruits and vegetables, and eat only pasture-raised meats. And I would even suggest going to the step of finding out, making sure that the grazing lands that those animals are feeding on is not sprayed with any types of pesticides or herbicides. Number 2, identify some other ways that you're exposed to these chemicals. And one example could be through plastics in food packaging, as well as plastic in clothing fibers. So if you're going to have an article of clothing, for example, that's going to be in contact with your skin, then it's much better if it's an organic, natural material that will be free of those. So even cotton, they use a lot of pesticides to raise cotton. So you can pre-wash some of those out, but it's much better to have organic cotton next to your skin. And number 3 is to begin some type of cleansing routine. And this can be very, very simple and easy. For example, you could take castor oil once a week to clean you out. The starting dose would be approximately 1/4 cup. And then you might have to increase that to get the somewhat dramatic effects. Don't do this every day because castor oil can be toxic itself. That's why it makes you poop so vigorously. But if you do it once a week, that is not going to cause any long-term problems. But you could also do enemas, and they could be done daily or also once a week. You can start slow, or you can use some herbal laxatives, like I usually recommend Dr. Jennifer Daniels' Vitality capsules, which is a mixture of different herbs like senna and cascara. And it's very effective. Or you could do something more comprehensive, and you should definitely strongly consider the use of healing solvents as part of this plan because of their ability to dissolve those lipophilic substances. So I want to just draw your attention to 2 opportunities that I offer to learn more about healing solvents, and especially my favorite, turpentine. And that is one, if you go on my link tree on my page, you'll see that there is a quiz that you can take. And if you take that quiz, which will be fun and enjoyable, you will get the natural medicine medicine cabinet. And that will provide more information about turpentine and some ways to use it successfully. And further, when you sign up as a part of taking the quiz, you'll get an invitation to my next terrain workshop, which will be around the time of the spring equinox, where I will be divulging everything about turpentine, including giving you instructions and access to my own turpentine protocol. So please take the time to click that link and don't miss this exciting workshop coming up in a couple of months. Okay, Alexander, what do you think about all that? Sorry, I wasn't hearing you. I think you're muted.
Excuse me, Andy. Yeah, that was very intriguing. I was saying, very startled by all the information. Thank you so much. If you guys have any questions for Dr. Andy at the moment, post them in the comment section, and then I'll pick them out, and ask them live. The first question was, what toxins are present in seed oils?
Well, the seed oils themselves actually are the toxins, and I'll explain a little bit. So, if you look at the origin of seed oils that are used in food products, you'll be drawn attention to cottonseed oil because that was the first one, and it was eventually used to make Crisco. And these are essentially products, right? The seeds from the cotton were not really eaten by animals in nature because they're poisonous. They have a specific poisonous oil in there. So they were used for industrial purposes like machine lubrication. But a process was eventually developed that could remove or mitigate the particular toxic fat that was in there and make it so it wouldn't kill you to eat it. And this was exploited by the food industry and many other types of seed oils, like canola oil, for example, which comes from the rape seed. And I think just the name of that should certainly deter one from using it. But that was also used as an industrial lubricant, and it was very good because it didn't get washed away with water. So it was used in a lot of marine applications. And after World War II, I believe, when there was a sudden major drop in the demand for canola oil, is when it was also a process was developed to make it less poisonous, so it could be used in food industry. Now, what happens is that these oils are not really meant to be eaten, and almost as soon as they're pressed from the seed, they become oxidized and essentially rancid. And they have to undergo special high heat processing to get rid of the nasty smell of the rancid oil so that it won't gross you out when it's in your food. But it's dirt cheap and used by the food industry, where they buy fat in large quantities to save huge money. But really, it's these oxidized fats themselves that are toxic. And as they're more and more studied, more and more bad outcomes become associated with this. And if you want to find out really a lot of detail about the toxicity of seed oils, I think you should look at the work of, his name just escaped me, but Alexander, perhaps you remember, he was one of the speakers at our Decoding Diets conference from Australia, Paul Mason.
Okay.
Sorry, Dr. Paul Mason has some excellent lectures on seed oils that I would definitely recommend. All right, what do we have next, Alexander?
Speaking of Paul Mason, who is also an expert on keto, by the way, how to best know if one is in ketosis?
Well, certainly you can debate, and it is highly debated, what exactly is the importance of being in a ketotic state in terms of your health. But there may be reasons why this is important. For example, if you're doing this diet for a child with epilepsy, it may be very important to know this. But you can simply get a ketone meter that measures your breath and will tell you essentially if you're in ketosis or not. So that's the simplest way to know for sure. But I guarantee if you're eating a zero carb diet, that within a few days of that, you're going to be in a ketotic state.
All right, we have a question from Zorro. Do women, as opposed to men, need to do different things to better lose weight and remove toxins?
Well, women kind of actually have an advantage, at least during the childbearing years, of having the monthly menstrual period, because that's a way that, although primarily, obviously, it's for reproductive function, but our bodies tend to take advantage of things to get as much out of it. So this is why women have discomfort during the period sometimes, because the body is mobilizing toxins and bringing them to be dumped, out through the uterus during the period. So it may be that they don't necessarily accumulate quite as much as men as a result of that. But essentially, the approach is really the same for men and women with respect to this issue. What's different is that the distribution of fat on a woman's body is different from a man's body. But we still do have the pattern that we know that the fat on the abdomen is more likely to be associated with bad outcomes like metabolic syndrome. So this hasn't been studied to my knowledge, but it's possible that some kinds of fat on our body may contain higher levels of these toxins than other fat areas.
All right. There was one question. Are coffee enemas as good as castor oil or vitality capsules for cleansing?
Well, coffee enemas are a little bit different because castor oil or water enemas or herbal laxatives are primarily just increasing your bowel output. So your body will essentially go through different mechanisms to dump toxins into the bowel. It could be through the liver and also directly into the colon. And that's what you're doing. But with a coffee enema, you're doing something additional because you are also flushing out the colon like with a regular water enema. But there are some molecules in the coffee that actually go through special veins in your rectum directly to the liver, and they increase the liver's healing abilities. One is they help decongest the liver by opening up the bile ducts. And they also provide a special substrate for glutathione for the liver, which is one of the main detox molecules that the liver uses. So if you have any liver congestion, the signs of which you can learn about in my terrain workshop, Love Your Liver, then you might want to consider coffee enemas as the primary approach.
Right, last question. Are avocado and olive oils included in the seed oils to be skewed?
Very good question. So, and my understanding is olive oil and avocado oil, the oils don't necessarily come from the seed, they come from the fruit. So it's a little bit different. And these oils are not necessarily oxidized and rancid. They're much more stable when they're stored. And I'm not talking about the processed versions. I'm talking about the virgin press of these oils. And certainly if it's done as a cold press, right, cold pressed extra virgin olive oil is the safest way because the heating process itself can create some oxidation. But these, oils are a bit different. They existed, further back in history. They weren't developed with modern technology and known to be poisonous to the best of my knowledge. Now, there are some, with olive oil, I don't recommend frying with it because under heat, moderate to high heat, you can have some destruction of the compounds in the oil, and some toxic compounds can be created by that process, right? It has a low smoke point. Now, avocado oil has a higher smoke point and could be, better for sauteing and frying. So I like to, use olive oil for things like, salad dressing or marinades that are, done under refrigeration or at room temperature.
All right, that was excellent, Andy. All right, well, that was very good. We'll see you guys next week. I look forward to it. Any closing remarks, Andy, before we close it off?
Well, I just want to, thank everyone, and don't forget to take our quiz so that you can get more information about turpentine and healing solvents, so that you can have excellent results for your health. And we'll see you again next Wednesday at noon with another exciting topic.
All right, take care, everybody. Cheers.
Bye now.